Chapter 271-19, Hope Street, Sherwood Borough. This area was located close to the Tussock River which went through Backland. Pedestrians could see the turbid but unusually wide water surface through the cracks and crevices in their houses. The Daily Observer reporter, Mike Joseph, alighted the carriage and pointed at a three-story, grayish-blue building ahead of them. He said to Klein, who was standing next to him and wearing a black double-breasted suit and a half-top hat and gold-rimmed glasses, "That's the Golden Rose, the best legal brothel in the area of the Backland Bridge, as well as Sherwood Borough. It opens at 3 in the afternoon and stays open until 2 in the morning. The best legal brothels in the Sherwood and Backland Bridge regions. In other words, there are better ones in these two regions but they're illegal." Klein silently mused and shot a glance at the entrance which had an inlaid golden rose. It didn't hang any signboards. "This doesn't count as a street girl, right?" he answered without thinking. "Of course, it's of a higher grade." Mike personally led Klein to the front of the building and pushed the door open. As soon as he entered, Klein caught a whiff of a mixed fragrance that was slightly pungent and heard a soothing yet suggestive melody. Instinctively, he looked around and saw bouncers, in black coats and half-top hats, standing on either side of the entrance and in every corner of the hall. As a legitimate business, they were obviously meant to deal with drunkards and boors. The Golden Hall was surrounded by all sorts of sofas, chairs, and even a piano. In the center, there was a dancing area. At that moment, there were many ladies sitting in different areas with their hair colored in gold, brown, pale yellow, or black. Some of them looked mature, some shy and young, some young and attractive, and others who were rather beautiful. These ladies were either enjoying the melody, giggling whilst in conversations with each other, quietly reading newspapers and magazines, or dancing with the men. It was only 3:30 in the afternoon, so there weren't many customers. At a glance, this place looked more like a proper ball than a brothel. If you come after 8 in the evening, you'll see some interesting performances. If any of the ladies catch your eye, go over and invite them to dance and then ask them for their prices amidst the beautiful melody. If both sides can come to an agreement, you can head to the second or third floor and have a wonderful time in some room. As long as you're willing to spend money, you can sleep here the entire night." Mike turned his head from left to right, suddenly losing his previous calm and gentlemanliness, appearing a little more frivolous. He walked into the hall with a smile, and he approached a young girl who was at most 15 or 16 years old. Is he showing his true nature, or is this in conduct of a professional? Klein watched, a little flabbergasted as he subconsciously followed behind Mike Joseph. The victim, Sibber, was only 16 years old. In theory, a girl of similar age is more likely to be a friend and would know more. At that moment, Mike lowered his voice and explained. He then raised his thin eyebrows and asked in a normal voice, "Which lady caught your fancy?" "I'm just your bodyguard," Klein responded with very normal logic. Mike slightly nodded and suddenly laughed. "I'm not used to being watched when I do that sort of thing. I'll be standing watch outside." Klein understood what Mike meant, and took a serious, professional stance. Without another word, Mike walked up to the young girl, bent down, and extended his hand, inviting her to dance. Being a prostitute at this age, Backland sure is so bedazzling and dirty. To think that there would be a middle-aged gentleman of seemingly good bearing patronizing this place. Even the sides of his hair are white. Klein lowered his hands and stood very straight, watching Mike and the young girl engage in a slow dance. After a few minutes, Mike walked back and said to Klein with slight annoyance, "It's too expensive." As the two approached each other, he added in a low voice, "The girl knew Sibber, but the owner, ma'am, Lopez, forbids them from speaking with anyone else on this matter, otherwise, they would be severely punished." God, when the punishment was mentioned, the poor girl even shuddered instinctively. I can imagine how horrible it must be. Helpless, Klein sighed in sympathy, and asked in a suppressed voice, "So, what are you planning to do?" "I don't want to cause trouble for those girls again." I plan on going straight to Ma'am Lopez. Mike patted Klein on the shoulder and said, "Protect me." Klein turned his body to the side and warned in a serious tone, "If we encounter a dangerous situation, you must listen to me. Do you understand? Listen to me." "Okay, okay." Mike raised his hands to his shoulders and nodded. As he spoke, he walked towards a single sofa in the corner. There was a charming lady, with thick makeup, in a gorgeous dress seated there. "If you don't want to give up after a dance and embarrass yourself in front of those girls, I suggest you talk to Ma'am Lopez first and find out the prices of the different girls." Mike raised his voice. The lady heard their conversation and looked over. She slowly got up and smiled. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm Lopez. Did any girl catch your fancy?" "Yes." Mike suddenly sized her up and said with a chuckle, "I really admire you." "I admire you too. You're acting like this is your home." Klein's mouth twitched. Lopez's expression froze for a second, then she gave a fake laugh and said, "Sorry, I'm not feeling well today. You should know that there are times every month where women feel quite under the weather." Seeing that there was no way to get Lopez into a room for a conversation, Mike fell silent for a few seconds before suddenly turning serious. "Ma'am Lopez, I'm a reporter. I wish to understand more about Sibber's matter. Here's my documentary proof." Lopez's face darkened and she replied impatiently, "I've already told everything I know to the police. You should ask them. Sibber was a vagrant orphan who was adopted by me. That night, she accepted an invitation from a guest to spend the night at his house, and she died on her way back in the morning. All right, please leave. Or invite a lady to dance." As she spoke, Lopez waved over two of her bouncers. Klein stepped in to shield off Mike Joseph and escorted him back to the hall. Upon seeing this, the two bouncers didn't rashly chase him away. After a few steps, Klein said in a low voice, "She's lying." "Oh." Mike turned his head in surprise. When she spoke, her eyes darted around. "She didn't dare to look at you directly, but she was also secretly sizing you up, which means she was lying and watching your reaction. In addition, her stance was highly defensive, and she appeared very agitated." Klein gave his analysis. Mike opened his mouth and exclaimed after a few seconds, "You really are a great detective. Only with your keen observation and outstanding deduction skills were you able to discover such useful details." "That's only because I had my spirit vision on and could see that Lopez's emotional colors weren't right. I came up with the reasons after." Klein smiled and said, "Thank you, it's time for us to go." Mike Joseph looked back at Lopez and saw that she was walking towards the side door of the hall, as though she was going to her own lounge, and that the side door was in a corner of the room. It was very quiet around there, and there were many areas in the hall that couldn't see what was going on inside. There were also two bouncers standing guard outside. "Perhaps, we should follow Ma'am Lopez and observe her reaction. Maybe the anxiety from just now will make her do something." Mike suddenly turned his head to look at Klein. "Can you take care of those two bouncers quickly?" "Sir, I'm only responsible for your protection, and that's against the law." Klein smiled in response. "I'll pay you more. A total of £5 based on the combat price from before. If there's another fight when we run, it would be £10. Mike Joseph gritted his teeth. "Deal." Klein reached out and shook his hand. Afterward, the two of them circled around to avoid the two bouncers from before and quietly approached the side door. "Guests, please stop. Please leave this area." One of the bouncers stepped forward and stopped Klein and Mike Joseph. "Sorry, we'll immediately." Klein bowed politely and apologized. At that moment, his right fist suddenly punched out, heavily striking at the bouncer's abdomen in front of him. The bouncer instinctively clutched his stomach, his body bent over. As for Klein, who had now stood up, he raised his left hand and chopped the bouncer at the back of the head. Pow! The bouncer fell to the ground and fainted. His companion was clearly caught by surprise at this turn of events. He just stared blankly and failed to react in time. Klein immediately slid over and covered the bouncer's mouth with his right hand and punched his abdomen with his left fist. Bang! The bouncer suddenly bent down and spat out his undigested food, and Klein promptly withdrew his right hand and chopped downward with his palm. At the same time, his left hand supported his opponent, allowing the bouncer to slowly fall onto the ground without making a sound. After exchanging looks, Klein turned the knob, pushed open the side door, and stepped inside. Mike Joseph lowered his body and quickly followed. "Why are you so skilled? You're just a reporter." Klein lampooned under his breath, walking briskly but at a rapid pace along the paved corridor. Suddenly, they heard Lopez's voice. "Tell Capim not to send anyone over in the next few days." "Capim? Send anyone?" Klein looked at Mike and found him looking equally puzzled. At that moment, they heard Lopez's footsteps that were headed towards the corridor. "Let's go." Klein tugged Mike and ran for the exit without turning back. During this process, he closed the side door and broke the lock in passing. It could prevent the people inside from coming out for a while. Then, as if nothing had happened, they hurriedly walked through the hall and approached the exit while hearing faint, angry voices. After reaching the streets, Mike heaved a sigh of relief and said in amazement and sincerity, "I've experienced many similar scenarios, but not once was it as simple and relaxed as it was today. Thank you. I need to return to find out who Capim is." As he spoke, he took out his wallet, fished out a 5-pound note, and muttered, "But frankly, your price is really expensive. It's worth more than half a week's salary. But you can claim for reimbursement, right?" Klein answered with a grin. Following that, he asked in concern, "Aren't you afraid that Lopez will find your newspaper firm and get the police to arrest you? That's a fake ID card." Mike Joseph shrugged with a gesture of familiarity. Klein could only admire him. After watching Mike board a carriage and leave, he walked diagonally across the street, waited for a public carriage and kept an eye out for anyone chasing after him. At that moment, a rental carriage slowly approached and stopped in front of him. A middle-aged man in a black coat stepped out the carriage and nodded at Klein. He had blue eyes, a thin face, and gray temples. It was the same old gentleman that Klein had seen in the Golden Rose. "He's not a customer of the Golden Rose. He's just like us." Klein suddenly came to this realization. "Hello, I'm Detective Isengard Stanton. I'm assisting the police in this case. Can we have a chat?" The middle-aged man pointed at the carriage tracks. Chapter 272 Detective. A colleague. However, the fact that he's able to assist the police in dealing with such a serious case shows that he truly is a well-known detective, at least within Civilhouse Yard. Isn't the serial killer involved in devil worship supposed to be handed over to the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, or the machinery hive mind? All the police department needs to do is send a few assistants, so why would they need to seek the help of a private detective? Yes, the 11 serial murders must have caused a sensation. Civilhouse Yard is under a lot of pressure, and they aren't willing to just wait in misery. Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, but on the surface, he revealed a smile. All right. He boarded Isengard Stanton's rented carriage and saw a young man with brown hair inside. "This is my assistant, Isengard," who had a thin and angular face, introduced. "Please, have a seat." He didn't close the carriage's door, nor did he let the carriage driver drive the horse forward to show that he meant no harm. Klein deliberately sat down uneasily and asked worriedly, "What would you like to talk about, Mr. Stanton?" Isengard took out a dark pipe and said, "I want to know what you've learned from following Ma'am Lopez. Did you hear or discover anything?" "I'm also a detective," and you should know that we have confidentiality agreements in this business, Klein deliberately replied as though he was in a dilemma. I'm asking you on behalf of Civilhouse Yard. This has nothing to do with a confidentiality agreement. Isengard rubbed the pipe with his thumb. A pound, How about 2 pounds? Having learned a lesson from the previous incident with Massault, together with the fact that there was no need to keep it a secret, Klein replied without hesitation, sure. All right. Isengard smiled and took out 2 one-pound notes from his pocket. Klein acted as though he was recalling something before frankly saying, we only heard one sentence. Ma'am. Lopez attempted to order her subordinates to tell Capim that he's not to send anyone over in the next few days. Capim? Isengard nodded, seemingly enlightened. Got it. You know Capim? Klein didn't hide his surprise. Isengard handed the notes over and said with a faint smile, he's one of the most controversial magnates in Sherwood Borough. In Backlund, innocent girls often go missing along deserted streets, and after a long time, they might be chanced upon in all sorts of legal or illegal brothels. A lot of rumors point to Capim as the criminal honcho filled with blood and filth on his hands, but due to a lack of evidence, he remains free to this date. Furthermore, he knows a lot of important people. If that's true, then this fellow should die 1,000 times over. Klein nodded, sighed, and said, this is Lone, this is Backlund, Mr. Stanton, I shall bid you farewell. Thank you for your cooperation. Isengard got up midway as a polite gesture to send him off. By the way, your fighting skills are excellent. Maybe we'll have a chance to work together in the future. How should I address you? Sherlock Moriarty, Klein answered briefly and got off the carriage. Only when he boarded a newly arrived tracked carriage did Isengard Stanton instruct his assistant to close the door and order the carriage driver to head towards Hillston Borough. Turning his head to the side, he looked out of the window. The gray-haired elderly gentleman had put away his dark pipe, pulled out a brass ornament from his pocket, slowly stroking it in his hand. The brass ornament was a pocket-sized open book with a vertical eye in the center. The appearance and get-up of Mr. Moriarty from just now were a bit out of place. He wore very cultured gold-rimmed glasses, but he had deliberately grown a beard around his mouth, making him look crude and barbaric. This is not quite in line with the norm. In this day and age, people who wear gold-rimmed glasses tend to care a lot about their image, the image of having knowledge and bearing. Maybe he's trying to hide something. Of course, it's also possible that he's a gentleman with an unusual aesthetic sense. Isengard seemed to be talking to himself, but he also seemed to be teaching his assistant. At that moment, Klein, who was sitting on the carriage, mumbled to himself silently as he leaned against the wall, that Detective Isengard Stanton is problematic. Ever since I activated my spirit vision, he had a blue color of rational thought and indifference and maintained a purple color of spirituality dominance. There weren't many other colors of emotion appearing. For normal people, unless they're wholeheartedly focused on studying a difficult problem, it's very difficult to maintain similar states for extended periods of time. Other emotions will inevitably appear, the difference being the issue of how long they can remain in that state. Yes. Either Detective Isengard Stanton is one such genius at observation and reasoning with extraordinary talent, or he's a beyonder. The tracked public carriage had 2 floors as it ferried more than 40 passengers towards the Backlund Bridge area. Klein gradually reined in his thoughts and cast his gaze out the window and admired the 2 to 3-story buildings on the other side of the road. Occasionally he could see brown houses 5 or 6 stories high, a sign of Backlund's latest trend and of the kingdom's most advanced construction technology. After a transfer, Klein arrived at Iron Gate Street and got off the carriage opposite the Bravehearts bar. As it wasn't the peak period at the bar yet, the moment he entered, he saw Caspers drinking at the bar. The old man with the brandy nose had requested for a glass of Langsky Proof, his eyes narrowed in satisfaction as he savored the fragrance of the malt and the burning sensation in his throat. Klein moved closer, rapped the counter, and asked with a smile, "Is Merrick here?" At the same time, he had one hand in his pocket as he gripped Azek's copper whistle, using his spirituality to shield its negative effects. Before he finished his sentence, he felt gazes sweep past him. It was evident that they were observing him. By the time he finished asking his question, the gazes moved away from him and focused on Casper's. The old man with the huge scar on his face opened his eyes, and when he saw that it was Klein, he said in a bad mood, "He didn't come. He didn't come yesterday either. He didn't come." Klein let out a breath of relief, no longer using his spirituality to rap Azek's copper whistle. "When I mentioned Merrick, someone looked at me. When they heard that I was asking him for his whereabouts, the gaze shifted again. Someone is also looking for Merrick." Klein resisted the urge to turn around and observe as he analyzed the abnormality. Combined with an original doubt of his, he felt that the question now had a general answer to it. "I was puzzled last week, why would a Sequence 5 Miss Bodyguard accept a 3-day protection mission for £1,000? This isn't to say that the price is too low, but rather that someone of that level already counts as a powerful person. In the Church of the Goddess, she's qualified to be a Nighthawk deacon or a diocese bishop. If she can gain the favor of a holy artifact, she can even compete for the position of an archbishop or a high-ranking deacon. Among the various secret organizations and intelligence agencies, Sequence 5 also implies that the person would be the person in charge of a borough or at least the number 2 or 3. Even if it were a Beyonder who isn't a part of any organization, a person with such strength would be able to establish a small organization of their own, no matter which point of view it was from. Miss Bodyguard could enjoy tributes from her subordinates, so there was no need for her to personally take the job. At the time, I thought that I had most likely hired a Sequence 6 security guard, who would be able to last a little longer against the experts sent by Bakerland, creating a chance for me, but who knew that Miss Bodyguard would be so terrifyingly strong? Judging from today's events, Miss Bodyguard and Merrick are probably similar to me. Their identities are sensitive, and they have to hide away. Yes, their situation might be even worse, and they have to constantly worry about being hunted down. TCH, to be able to hunt Miss Bodyguard, even if that organization doesn't have any high-sequence Beyonders, they must have some holy artifacts or multiple Sequence 5 members. Of course, this is just my hunch. Perhaps it has to do with the exposure of Merrick as a Beyonder and he's now targeted by the Machinery Hive Mind Squad. After some thought, Klein said with regret, "Is that so? I was planning on playing cards with him." Upon hearing something that didn't match Klein's usual manner of speech, Caspers was alarmed. He didn't look around either, but chortled and said, "I'll be having a card game tonight. Texas, do you want to join in?" "No, I just want to play till dinner." "Sigh, I think I'll just head home." Klein sighed and left the Bravehearts bar without even ordering anything to drink. He had intended to ask Caspers about other Beyonder gatherings, but in that situation, he carefully abandoned the idea. In fact, he could have gone to a card room or some relatively sealed area to talk with Caspers, but just to be safe, he decided to wait until next time. Klein was in no hurry to return home. Instead, he went to the one-bedroom apartment he rented in East Borough and started divining above the gray fog to confirm that no one was following him. After easing his mind, he reached Minsk Street before it was completely dark and found all sorts of subscribed newspapers crammed into his mailbox. "I was in a hurry to leave today, so I didn't even have time to read it. At the Quelag Club, I had a good meal after shooting practice and took a nap, before being forced to play a few tennis matches with Talim. My skills aren't good enough, but my physical fitness can make up for that." He mumbled silently as he opened the door and went inside before twisting the gas lock. He brought the newspapers into the living room and sat on the sofa. He lit the wall lamp and started reading. Klein first read through the Backlund Morning Post and immediately flipped to the 5th page and saw an advertisement. It was an advertisement for the Ernst firm's purchase of goods. The prices were 7 pence per liter of flour, 1 solely of butter, 6 pence per pound of lard, 1 solely 3 pence per pound of cream, 8 solely per pound of Marquis black tea. In other words, there would be a Beyonder gathering in the same place at 8 in the evening tomorrow. The code to the door is to knock 7 times heavily, 1 time lightly, 6 long intervals, and 1 short interval in that order. The remaining 3 and 8 are meaningless. Klein interpreted the content, leaned back against the sofa, and began to look forward to the gathering tomorrow evening. He wanted to sell some formulas to see if he could buy the corresponding ingredients or items. Chapter 273 Wednesday night, 5 minutes to 8. In an alley behind Braveheart's bar. Klein circled around for a while based on his memories before finally finding the house with the dark candlelights. He was disguised today in a grayish-blue worker's uniform, cap, and a beard so that no one would connect him to the guy who had tried his luck by buying Black Snake's item. It would be best if Eye of Wisdom and the apothecary don't recognize me. Otherwise, a newbie who had relied on luck to become a Beyonder and was able to come up with several potions after a week would definitely be suspicious. Klein put his hands in his pockets and felt for Azek's copper whistle, the ordinary tarot cards, and the charms he had replenished. His uniform was specially modified by a tailor. There were many small pockets with metal bottles filled with herbs powder and extract essence. After taking a deep breath and slowly exhaling, Klein took out the metal mask that could only cover half his face and finished the first step to his disguise. Following that, he used the clown's ability to control his facial expression and his physical tics, as well as his gait while numbing his facial nerves. He wanted to be vastly different from his previous self. However, I'm not sure what Eye of Wisdom relies on to recognize people. This is all I can do. Sigh, if only I was already a faceless. But if that's the case, I wouldn't need to join such low-level Beyonder gatherings. Klein stood outside the door in silence for a few seconds. He then raised his right hand and knocked on the door, 7 hard knocks and 1 light one, with 6 long pauses and 1 short pause in between. Almost without waiting, the small wooden board on the door was silently pulled open, and an eye appeared behind it. It examined the visitor from head to toe. 2 or 3 seconds later, the door creaked open and Eye of Wisdom's attendant handed a hooded black robe to Klein. Klein maintained his emotionless state as he quickly put on the robe and pulled down his hood, letting the shadows cover his face. On the way to the living room, he deliberately took steps he wasn't used to and tried his hardest to eliminate the awkwardness. There was only 1 candle in the dark and silent room and quite a number of members at the gathering. Klein didn't choose a corner like the previous time. Instead, he sat on a high stool right in the center. In short, he wanted everything about his external appearance and behavior to be completely different from the previous 2 times. And it was precisely due to his identity as a clown that gave him this domain of expertise, allowing him to reflect his own body into his mind and gain fundamental control over it. The living room was so silent that it appeared frozen. Time passed by, and finally, Eye of Wisdom looked at the clock on the wall and said in his ancient voice, "It's time. Let's begin. We don't need to wait for our late friends." Just as he finished his sentence, Klein immediately said with a hoarse voice, "I want to sell potion formulas. They are Sequence 9 Bard and Sequence 8 Light Suppliant from the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun. The former is £220 and the latter is £450. This was the most suitable plan that he could come up with after much consideration. The Spectator and the Telepathist potions were related to the Psychology Alchemists, a secret organization that was still active in Backlund in the Lone Kingdom. If he recklessly produced them, he might attract their attention. And the Church of Eternal Blazing Sun was blocked out by the Church of the Lord of Storms, so the corresponding Beyonders rarely appeared in Backlund and could do very little. Therefore, it was an extremely safe choice. The potion of the Seer pathway involved Klein himself, and he certainly didn't want to reveal his characteristics. After having experienced so many battles and watched so many battles with Beyonders, he gradually came to understand something. It was that below the high sequences, Beyonders of different pathways had their own characteristics which didn't overlap. That was to say, each of them had their own strengths and weaknesses, and their strengths and weaknesses were all very obvious. The strengths were indeed strong, and the weaknesses were indeed weak. For example, the spectator pathway lacked the ability to fight in actual combat, but if they were ignored and were unconsciously misled, then no matter how strong an opponent's combat skills were, it was possible for them to die without knowing why. A clear example would be Hurricane Rear Admiral Kalangos, who clearly possessed the mystical item, Creeping Hunger, and had an overall combat strength of a sequence 5, but he still died in a rather inexplicable manner. Most of this was thanks to Azek, but one couldn't dismiss the role of the spectator. Due to the fact that the majority of the Beyonder jobs below the high sequence had distinct characteristics and obvious weaknesses with weak bodies, if one could conceal one's strengths and understand the situation of their enemies beforehand, it wasn't impossible for them to defeat someone stronger. In extreme cases, there was still a very small chance of a sequence 9 killing a sequence 5. Of course, this was a perfect hypothesis, but in reality, it was almost impossible. Sequence 5 was already considered strong, and the corresponding Beyonder powers could be considered miraculous. Strengths could effectively cover up weaknesses, but before reaching sequence 6, it was very difficult to cause any effect on them. On the other hand, many of the Beyonders below high sequences were very afraid of being attacked by a group, even if their opponents were all below their own sequence. This was because once one became flustered, their attempts to avoid a fault would lead to failure of another. Their weaknesses could lead to fatal outcomes. These problems were why shepherds were ranked first below high sequences. They were so all-round that if they combined and matched their Beyonder powers well enough, they would almost have zero shortcomings. After I advance to the sequence 7, I'll have all sorts of magical Beyonder powers. Then, even if I encounter a sequence 6, I'll be able to contend against them for a while, and I might even be able to win. If I encounter a sequence 5, there might still be a chance of escaping. As his thoughts raced, Klein looked around, waiting for someone to speak. If Bard and Light Suppliant can't be sold, then I can only go for second best and consider selling Spectator and Telepathist. In consideration of Beyonder characteristics, indestructibility and conservation. The formula of my own pathway definitely shouldn't be sold. The witch pathway wouldn't as well, for it would lead to many tragic cases. Whether it's instigator or witch, they're the type that necessitates committing evil deeds. Klein was a little nervous, but his face remained expressionless as he waited. Actually, I can consider buying it. At that moment, the chubby apothecary laughed. I can also accept another apprentice and give him these 2 formulas, making him specialize in praying for light to shine on my herbs. Perfect. How extravagant. His words broke the momentary silence in the room. A man in the corner, who had his hood pulled very low, spoke in a deliberately sharp voice, perhaps I can give it to my child. At least it's stronger than my sequence. Sequence 9, 200 pounds, sequence 8, 400 pounds, if you agree, we have a deal. To be able to take out 600 pounds at one go means he's quite rich. That's enough to buy a house in Tingen City. Klein pretended to think, looked at the other members at the gathering, and observed their reactions. Noticing that no one had the urge to raise the price, and that the other party's bid had reached his bottom line, Klein thought for a while and said, I'll tag on an additional request. You cannot sell these 2 formulas in this gathering, but you are free to do as you wish elsewhere. The man said sharply, all right, mister. Eye of Wisdom will bear witness. Klein didn't know how to prove that the formula was real, but he didn't want to ask as it would expose the fact that he hadn't participated in many gatherings. Therefore, he silently pulled up his robe and took out the 2 potion formulas he had written long ago and handed it to an attendant beside him. The attendant didn't walk to the corner. Instead, he went to the single sofa in the center and handed the folded paper over to the Eye of Wisdom. The old gentleman spread out the paper and, without taking an extra look at it, placed it on a small round table beside him. Then, he took out a handkerchief and wiped his right palm. From his pocket, he took out a ring inlaid with many tiny diamonds. This ring was complicated and exquisite in design. In the middle of the ring was a dark green gem that looked like an eye. Just by looking at it from a distance, Klein felt his head swell and his body turn uncomfortable. It was just like back when he was taking his math examination. Eye of Wisdom solemnly wore the ring on his right middle finger and then closed his eyes, as if he was preparing something. Suddenly, the emerald green gem on the ring bloomed with a resplendent golden color which was as bright as the sun. Eye of Wisdom quickly extended his right hand and let the gem touch the potion formula written by Klein. The rays of golden light became purer until they eventually turned into a holographic projection. Authentic and effective. Eye of Wisdom announced in a low voice. He immediately removed the ring from his finger, not daring to wear it for another second. His tone sounds just like a notary. That ring is the most prized item in Mr. Eye of Wisdom's collection, sealed artifact 2-081. It emulates the powers of a notary. Klein watched on thoughtfully, feeling a little covetous. After the notarization, the deal was quickly concluded, and Klein received a thick wad of cash, all in 10-pound notes. After counting the bills 3 times, he didn't fold and put them in his pocket. Instead, he held them in the palm of his hand and waited for an opportunity to spend them. He planned on observing for a moment to ensure that there was nothing he needed before speaking again to mention his desire to purchase things. At that moment, the apothecary looked around and said, "I brought a few bottles of sedatives." He really brought it? I've already forgotten all about it. In order to be different from his past self, Klein could only pretend that he wasn't around. After shouting a few times and seeing that there was no response, the apothecary muttered, "That guy didn't come this time. Maybe he's dead somewhere. Thank you for your blessings. But it's delightful that you failed to recognize me." Klein heaved a sigh of relief. The apothecary habitually asked for Spring of the Elves marrow crystals again, but it was in vain as usual. Moments after he shut up, a woman whose face was completely shrouded by her hood said with 2 boxes at her feet, "I have 2 weapons with beyonder effects. This must be the lady who sold the inscribed steel sword the last time, right? My spirituality instincts as a seer tells me that she has another 2 similar weapons. Backing her is some beyonder armament organization, right? Well, maybe she has an artisan behind her, also known as Sequence 6 of the Machinery Specialist and Savant Pathway." Klein looked over with anticipation. He had agreed to give the son a beyonder weapon worth 500 to 700 pounds, which could effectively his combat ability. He didn't promise the specific type and characteristics, so long as it was similar and could be used, he could buy it. In any case, the son wasn't picky about it. Chapter 274. The woman with the hooded face looked around her and said, "The 2 weapons this time are easy to carry around. One of them is the Whip of Slowness. It's a replica of a particular mystical item. It can constantly create formless restraints, influencing your opponent bit by bit, slowing down his actions gradually. The longer you last in battle, the more effective it would be. It can still be used for 2 years. 450 pounds, or the potion formula for Barbarian. This whip sounds pretty good, and it feels like the spider silk ability of the Demoness of Pleasure. However, would it seem a little strange for little son to use a whip?" Klein asked in a hoarse voice, "Can this invisible binding effect affect spirit-type creatures? For example, wraiths?" The lady shook her head slowly. "No." Without waiting for any further questions, she continued introducing, "The second weapon is called the Axe of Hurricane. It can raise the user's agility and running speed. There's also a 15% chance of inflicting a numbing effect to the enemy and a 5% chance of producing a bolt of lightning. If used in a thunderstorm, the chance of the lightning bolt will be raised to 50%. This has all been verified through experimentation and concluded through copious amounts of data. This weapon's effects can last for no more than a year. 520 pounds or the potion formula to Barbarian. This is much stronger than the Whip of Slowness. If it wasn't for the fact that it only has the beyonder effects for a year, it probably wouldn't be this price. Right, according to the description of Little Sun and the scene I vaguely saw, in the air above the city of Silver and the surrounding area, there are always flashes of lightning. The highest frequency is during daytime and the lowest frequency is during nighttime. This is very similar to a so-called thunderstorm environment. If it's really effective, then this axe of hurricane would be a truly mystical item in the hands of Little Sun. Each strike has a 50% chance of blasting out lightning. It would be absolutely formidable. Even if that doesn't work, looking at the most basic beyonder effects of the axe of hurricane, it's still quite a good weapon, and it meets the needs of Little Sun. As for the problem that it can only be used for a year, it's not a big problem to solve. In 1 year, with Little Sun's digestion rate and City of Silver's beyonder resources, as long as he has the potion formulas, he would at least be sequence 6 by then. At that point in time, he'll definitely need to replace his weapon. As his mind whirled, Klein basically determined that he was buying the axe of hurricane. At that moment, the apothecary muttered, "Is an axe easy to carry around? I feel like I've heard a joke, and I think it might be more appropriate to make a wrench. Say, can't you sell stuff like revolvers with beyonder effects? I will try my best to collect similar items." The woman emphasized the word, collect. "Alright, friends who are willing to buy one of these weapons, please make a bid." Before Klein could even speak, he heard a male voice from the long sofa. "Axe of hurricane, 520 pounds. The woman waited a few seconds before asking again, "Is there anyone else who wants to bid?" 530 pounds. Klein added 10 pounds. The man immediately replied, 550 pounds. This. Little Sun, if he raises it to more than 600 pounds, I won't be buying it. I'll get you a new whip. With a definite strategy in mind, Klein called out very calmly, 560 pounds. He tried to make it appear that no matter what offer was made, he could add on an additional 10 pounds. And the 600 pounds he had just earned was just enough to put invisible pressure on the other party. Upon hearing the latest price, the man fell silent and shrugged. "All right then, it's yours." Phew. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. "Is there anyone else who wants to bid for the axe of hurricane?" The woman asked again, but the room was silent. "Sold." The lady didn't hesitate any longer and handed the box next to her right foot to the attendant. The attendant had the eye of wisdom appraise it before bringing it to Klein. Money was handed over in exchange for the item. Putting away the remaining 4 10-pound notes, Klein opened the box and saw an axe that could be attached to one's back or tucked in one's belt. Its entire body was iron black in color, thick, and sturdy, with a sharp edge. In his spirit vision, it was clear that the creator had used a large number of spiritual materials. There were also many symbols and magic runes on the surface of the axe. They were embedded inside, turning into lightning and hurricane patterns. When Klein reached out to touch it, he felt a faint pricking pain. He nodded and placed the box on his lap. "It can be exchanged for the true root and juice of a mist trayant. My magician potion is only missing the spinal fluid of a dark-patterned black panther. I've made a good deal of money in my past few commissions, and together with my original savings and what I just have left, I have 209 pounds 5 solis and 5 pennies on me. The beyonder ingredients corresponding to sequence 7 are valued at 500 to 700 pounds. Heh, I still had to sell formulas or knowledge. Yes, I'll take the time to check on Leopard this week and confirm the progress of his bicycle." Klein stopped bidding and quietly watched from the sidelines. Later on, someone bought the Whip of Slowness for 480 pounds, and a beyonder ingredient called Heart of Featherman wasn't sold because its price reached 1,600 pounds and nobody wanted it. According to his knowledge of mysticism, Klein knew that this beyonder ingredient would be classified in the category of sequence 6. In the following transactions, more failed than succeeded. After all, most of the beyonders who came to the gathering had a specific purpose, and they wouldn't casually waste money and resources. They weren't like Klein, who bought any weapon as long as the Beyonder effects were good enough. I want to sell a formula potion. Sequence 9, Corpse Collector. 230 pounds. Towards the end, a man sitting quietly in a corner said with a deep voice. Corpse Collector. I remember that this potion formula can only be found in the Church of the Evernight Goddess, Church of the God of Combat, and the Numinous Episcopate. Has an undercover Nighthawk sneaked in, or is he a member of the Numinous Episcopate who's trying to revive death? Of course, it isn't that strange for low-sequence formulas to be found in the wild. This isn't a huge secret. I remember old Neil mentioning that the formula for Corpse Collector involved a desiccated black-spotted frog. Klein controlled himself and didn't smile. He thoughtfully looked ahead and discovered that the potion formula of Corpse Collector was quickly sold. The potion formula for Sequence 9 is very easy to sell. Before, there was just a single Sequence 8 Folk of Rage formula that failed to close several times, while my light suppliant formula matched with Sequence 9 Bard was sold relatively easily. Yes, most Beyonders would collect Sequence 9 formulas if they have the money to spare. They can give their own children and students more opportunities to choose from, allowing them to walk a path that they preferred. Under this premise, if a Sequence 8 formula doesn't have the foundation Sequence 9, they would have to wait for Beyonders who are attempting to advance, and there might not even be one in 1 to 2 years. After all, the circle of Beyonders is very scattered, and most people don't know about the acting method. Yes, they also don't know the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation and indestructibility. Klein silently thought and didn't speak. After another 15 minutes, seeing that the gathering was about to end, he asked probingly, who has the complete spinal fluid of a dark-patterned Black Panther? Silence. No one spoke in the living room. Klein thought for a moment, then added, I will provide payment that no Beyonder would refuse. For example, the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation and indestructibility. Unfortunately, I've already sworn to the goddess that I wouldn't impart the acting method to anyone else. I've already died once. I wonder if that oath is invalid. Klein forcefully retracted his scattered thoughts, but he still didn't hear anyone speak. Okay, next. He deliberately made a shrug that he wouldn't normally do. The apothecary cleared his throat and said, I've brought quite a few of my own medicine. Take a look at what you want. It's not expensive at all. It's just a few pounds or even a few solely. When the lady selling Beyonder weapons heard this, she asked curiously, I want to know if the dangerous beast in the sewers has been eliminated? The apothecary snorted immediately. You asked the right person. After saying that, he spread out his hands. I don't know either. After I got someone to make a police report, I haven't been to the sewers ever since. Bro, you're asking for a beating. It must have been hard for you to grow up so healthily. From the looks of it, it was very wise of you to choose the apothecary job. Klein couldn't help but lampoon in Chinese. The woman took a deep breath and slowly exhaled without saying a word. When all the strange medicine the apothecary had brought were sold, Eye of Wisdom announced that the gathering was over. He delegated Klein to be fifth to leave, through a secret passage in the basement. From the looks of it, Eye of Wisdom didn't recognize me either. With some relief, Klein took off his hooded robe and tossed it to the attendant. Then, he walked out of the passage and skillfully circled around it. After confirming that no one was following him, he took off his iron mask, left the secluded street, took the box containing the axe of Hurricane, and headed straight to East Borough. There were no gas lamps on Black Palm Street in East Borough, and after dark, it was like an abyss. In a particular apartment here, Klein sealed the room with a wall of spirituality, then he summoned himself and carried the axe of Hurricane above the grey fog. If it had been a little heavier, I wouldn't have been able to carry it with me even if I had Mr. Azek's copper whistle to reinforce my spirit. Then, would have to switch to a sacrificial ritual. Klein mumbled, sending his thoughts to the illusory star corresponding to the sun. The world has sacrificed the weapon to me. You can prepare the bestowment ritual. City of Silver. Upon seeing the grey fog and hearing Mr. Fool's instructions, Derek Berg immediately sat up and rushed to prepare. Before holding the bestowment ceremony, he silently took out his knight's sword and made a few vertical slashes to ease his anticipation. Would it be a straight sword, a broadsword, or a rapier? Derek stopped without realizing, unable to stop himself from thinking, and subconsciously pictured himself using that powerful weapon. After a while, during the ritual, he saw the beyonder weapon that belonged to him. It was an axe. Chapter 275 Dear Mr. Fool, please tell Mr. World that I'll try to gather the Miss Trent's true root and juice as soon as possible. After receiving the son's reply, Klein nodded indiscernibly and muttered to himself, from the looks of it, he's rather satisfied with the weapon. Even without the additional effects from the environment, the axe of Hurricane is still quite a formidable weapon. He had passed the information regarding the beyonder weapon's characteristics and limitations to the son. He didn't describe it directly in order to avoid sounding naggy. He needed to maintain his image. After doing all of this, Klein didn't stay any longer and immediately returned to the real world, changed his clothes, and left Black Palm Street. East Borough, Dharavi Street, in a cramped but lively pub. Zio Dericha covered her nose and mouth as she squeezed in. To her, what was bad about this place wasn't just because it smelled of alcohol and sweat, but that she would easily encounter people much taller than she was. She had to face their armpits and the strong odor was nauseating. Using a great deal of effort and even using the powers of an arbiter, Zio finally squeezed her way to the bar counter and saw the man she was looking for. It was a young man in his 20s. He had a face as long and thin as a horse. His eyebrows were messy and ferocious, but his facial features were relatively soft. He was gulping down alcohol and laughing loudly with the patrons around him. "Williams, I have something to talk to you about." Zio banged on the wooden counter. This boorish action immediately attracted many angry gazes. However, they quickly retreated under the stern gaze of an arbiter. "Oh, Zio, I haven't seen you in days. Let me see, it's been a week, no, at least 3 weeks. Care for a drink?" "Half and half," Williams said, half drunk and half surprised. Half and Half was one of the most popular alcoholic beverages in East Borough, made from malt beer and fortified grape wine, and because it has precisely made up of 2 constituents of equal proportion, it was known as Half and Half. "Are you really going to let me drink?" Zio pricked up her brows. "No, he doesn't." The boss, who was wiping the glasses, hurriedly answered on Williams's behalf. He clearly remembered how deadly the girl would become when she got drunk. She would use her fists to persuade the guests to quit drinking and throw them out one by one. The corner of Williams's mouth twitched as he spread out his hands and said, "Go on, why are you looking for me?" He was one of East Borough's informants and was connected to several gangs. Zio frowned and said, "Williams, can't you quit drinking? Save your money, marry a nice girl, and come home every day to hot water, food, and warm greetings. You can share all the things you've seen in the day with her, and she can tell you about the trivial things that happened in your house, and there will be cute kids who will kiss you on the cheek and play around you. Isn't such warmth nice?" She was able to gain a quick foothold in Backlund's East Borough, all thanks to Williams's help, so she had always wanted him to be better off. "Warmth?" Williams scoffed. "It's built on the money I bring back, and I've seen through the farce. If I could bring home 20 soldi a week, I'm sure my family would be warm and just as you described it to be, but if not, Lord, the screams and insults from the woman, the cries and shrieks of children, would drive me crazy. My mom is a good example. Every time my old man comes home, he'll beat me up and make a ruckus, so if that's the case, I might as well use the soldi in the pence on me to trade for drinks. No one cares how much I earn here, everyone drinks and chats, and the mood is really good. If I want women, there are cute street girls outside. They wouldn't quarrel with you." Zio smirked and said, "You really are an incorrigible believer of the Lord of Storms." One day, you'll die from alcoholism or some strange disease. At least I've enjoyed life, Williams replied without minding what she said. I haven't worked in almost 3 days, so I'm not going to give you a discount. Zio stopped persuading him. She stroked her short, disheveled blonde hair and handed him the portrait of Lenevis that Audrey had given her. Help me keep an eye out for this man. Find him as soon as possible. Here are different portraits of him. Williams spread out the piece of paper in his stupor and glanced at it before thinking. He looks too ordinary, and there are so many people in Eastborough. There are people who die at any moment. Some leave, some come, and others become vagrants. It'll be difficult to find him. In short, help me keep an eye out. Notify me immediately if you find anyone who looks like him. Zio took out a 5 soldi bill and handed it to him. Here's some beer money. If you can find the person in the portrait, I'll, give you another £10. £10? Williams whistled. Zio, when did you become so generous? Or is this person worth more? That's how much his reward is worth. £10 for providing clues. Zio pretended to look around the pub and answered, Don't forget about this matter, I'll come back in a few days' time. She had already run through nearly half of Eastborough and issued the mission to the gang leaders and informants she knew, and she had paid several pounds in advance. As long one of them succeeds, I'll earn it all back. All those profits. Zio silently cheered herself on and walked out of the pub with her nose and mouth covered. At that moment, the scene gradually turned chaotic due to some conflict between a few drunkards. Zio glanced over in exasperation, then raised her voice and shouted, Stop! A sense of dominance reverberated within the pub, and it was as though the drunkards had met their nemesis as they hurriedly sat down. Some of them even hugged their heads and squatted on the ground. Phew, I wonder when I'll advance to sheriff. Zio sighed, feeling a mix of satisfaction and anticipation. On Thursday morning, Klein took the long trip to St. George Borough, which was like another city altogether, to show some concern for his first investment. With his last tip and the revelation from Roselle's manuscript, Leopard was progressing very quickly on the bicycle project and had already built a crude prototype. This was very much in line with Klein's impression of bicycles. After a trial ride, Klein offered a few suggestions for improvements, saying he would disburse the second investment payment next week, and expressed his hope of bringing in new investors as soon as possible, so that the project could enter an industrial phase. The only problem was that Leopard believed that he was the inventor and had the right to name the product. He wasn't satisfied with the term bicycle and intended to adopt the more popular term bike. Klein didn't care. At noon, he returned to 15 Minsk Street, but before he could take off his hat, he heard a series of illusory pleas. Miss Justice. She has collected the information on the abject nobles so quickly. Still in thought, Klein prepared to enter the living room and head to the second floor. At that moment he heard the doorbell, and when he opened the door, he saw Julianne, the maid from the Sammers next door. Mr. Moriarty, Mrs. Sammer would like to invite you to a Sunday luncheon. There will be a lot of neighbors attending, the maid said as if she was reciting something. After his return last night, Klein had handed the portable camera to Mrs. Sammer and exchanged a few words with her, but he hadn't received any indication of a luncheon. That's right, according to the magazines, the middle class wouldn't invite anyone to an event in person, but instead, they formally sent their servants or maids to send the invitation. This is in line with Mrs. Sammer's style. Klein was puzzled at first before he immediately came to a realization, so he promised to punctually attend on Sunday. Who wouldn't want to have a free lunch? And Mr. and Mrs. Sammer aren't very difficult people to get along with, as long as you don't mind their showing off. Klein secretly added in his heart. He watched as Julianne left. He closed the door behind him and walked toward the stairs, his eyes scanning the slightly messy living room, dining room, and kitchen. It's been a few days since I've cleaned up. I'm a bachelor, so it's not bad that I'm able to maintain a level of tidiness such as this. I have too many secrets, and I might even suffer an attack. It's not too good to just hire an in-house maidservant for chores. Yes. I should discuss this with Mrs. Sammer on Sunday and ask her to send her maid to clean up twice a week, and I'll pay for it. Many tenants and landlords have had similar agreements. Klein calmly walked into the bedroom on the second floor and drew the curtains. After entering the fog, he found that the prayer had indeed come from Miss Justice. This girl of blue blood sat on a piano stool, her hands on the keys. She wasn't playing the piano, instead, she was whispering the honorific name of the fool that doesn't belong to this era. I've gathered the information regarding the abject nobles. I'm requesting permission to hold a sacrificial ritual and seek your help in passing it to Mr. World. That's quick, as expected of a professional. Klein immediately responded. Audrey, who had just returned from the Royal Coat of Arms office and experts in this field, completed the sacrificial ritual with a little unfamiliarity as she threw the thick manuscript into the illusory door. I'll pass it to the world. Klein's tone was indifferent as he cut off the connection. This time, he was in no hurry to return to the real world. Instead, he flipped through the manuscript and found the part pertaining to the Pound family. The Pound family had indeed obtained the title of Viscount from the Battle of the Violated Oath. After that, they were loyal to the royal family, and they had quite a bit of power in the army and their own fiefdom. However, 32 years ago, two of the family's heirs died from serious illnesses, one after another. At that time, the old Viscount had no choice but to bring the child of a distant relative home. Not long after, the old Viscount passed away. As the child was still young, under the enticement and instigation of the servants, he changed the butler and turned foppish. In just 8 years he had lost most of his fortune and was reduced to a baron. Even the family's house in Backlund was sold. In the years that followed, his title was reduced once again to that of a baronet. Died of serious illnesses. Their corpses are probably nowhere to be found. They should all be in that innermost room in the underground structure, outside that bloody door. The old Viscount must have deliberately concealed the matter, preventing the royal family, military or churches to investigate. From the looks of it, the Pound family must have discovered the underground structure from the fourth epoch about 30 years ago. Perhaps, the underground secret door was built by them, but there are more than 2 corpses in that room. There were others who had entered in ancient times to probe the area. Well, I'll have to talk to Baronet Pound in a way that won't reveal my identity. Klein stopped thinking and looked at the last paragraph. He saw what he wanted, Baronet Pound, currently living at 29, Civilhouse Street, Empress Borough. Chapter 276, 276 Civilhouse Prefecture was located west of the Lone Kingdom, across the Hornacis mountain range from the Intis Republic. And in Backlund, there was a street named after it, on the edge of Empress Borough, where the headquarters of the capital's police department was located. Many people chose to settle down here for the peace of mind, and Rafter Pound was one of them. The baronet stood by the closed window in his warm activity room at Unit 29, in his cotton-quilted pajamas, staring diagonally across the street at Civilhouse Yard. He was in his early 40s, but the sides of his hair had turned white. He had puffy eyes and clear wrinkles on his face. His body constantly emitted the smell of alcohol. On the floor behind Rafter lay some torn lingerie, and opposite it was a burning fireplace. The baronet raised his glass and gulped the rest of the liquid in it. Then, he walked slowly to the door and returned to his bedroom to get some sleep. As there was no pipe to transfer the heat from the fireplace, he felt the bone-chilling chill of late autumn as soon as he left the activity room. Damn it! Rafter Pound cursed under his breath as he staggered to the bedroom door and twisted the handle. The bedroom was dark, with only a faint crimson glow shining in. Rafter was about to close the door behind him and collapse into bed when his eyes suddenly froze. A figure was sitting quietly on a chair beside the curtain. The figure wore a pair of grayish-blue pants and a cap. The entire person was completely hidden in the shadows. Sensing Baronet Pound's gaze, the man slowly raised his head and looked over. His face was painted red, yellow, and white, looking like the funniest clown. Rafter was about to shout and run when he saw a revolver aimed at him and heard two deep and hoarse sentences. "I advise you not to do anything unwise. If you cooperate, I won't harm you, and I won't take away your belongings, if you still have any left." Rafter Pound's expression changed a few times, and he very obediently closed the bedroom door. Then, he half raised his hands and sat on the edge of the bed. What do you want from me?" He hiccuped in his drunken stupor, and his body trembled slightly as he reminded, "Civilhouse Yard is just across the street." "I know, but I think I'm closer to you than you are to Civilhouse Yard." Disguised as a clown, Klein had changed his voice and tone as he warned, "And my purpose is just to ask you a few questions." Before he came to Civilhouse Street, he had divined if there would be any danger in making this trip in the mysterious space above the grey fog and had obtained an answer that it was very safe. "Questions?" Rafter's lips trembled as laughed bitterly, "Here we go again. Am I never going to escape this nightmare? Have there been many people coming to you with questions?" Klein continued the topic. "No, not only questions. After my uncle, the Honorable Old Viscount, passed away, too many things have happened to me. The amiable old butler resigned for no reason and has vanished. Those servants and maids would change one after the other without warning, becoming unfamiliar and cold. They were looking for something, yes, they were looking for something, I wasn't even 10 back then. All I could do was watch, and I didn't dare tell anyone. I was afraid that I would never wake up again." Rafter replied as though he was on the brink of collapse. "Looking for something? Were they searching for the underground structure, or the treasures of the Pound family, such as the Beyonder characteristics and mystical items buried near the evil spirit? The royal family and the churches must have realized this, as the higher-ups must know about the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation and indestructibility. Since the Pound family was in ruins, these things should have been taken back, right? Unless the old Viscount paid a huge price and bought some other rare Beyonder characteristics and mystical items of the same sequence to conceal the matter of the underground structure." After Klein finished listening quietly, he generated many guesses. He seemed relaxed, but in reality, he could attack at any time. "How long has this been going on for?" I don't know. There are faces around me that I don't know. How can I be sure that the remaining people aren't also in cahoots?" Heh, I pretended not to notice anything. After trembling for a few years, I was enticed by them to do drinking, sex, gambling, smoking marijuana, and all sorts of things that make me look like a piece of trash. Rafter Pound gave a somewhat crazy laugh. "They're finally relieved and are no longer watching me. When I sold that house, whoosh. All of them left, with no idea where they went. No, they must still be secretly monitoring me, preventing me from calling the police. Right, they aren't letting me call the police. This fellow has some mental illness. I have no idea if what he said is true or false. In his aura, the change in his mood colors adhere to logic, but what if he just feels that he had let down the old Viscount and fantasized a whole sequence of events like this to find an excuse for his degeneration? Later, he would keep telling himself that until he's utterly convinced. As a qualified keyboard warrior, Klein, who knew a little of everything, had seen similar cases in his previous life. After thinking for 2 seconds, he asked, "What did these people ask you?" "They asked me how the 2 children of the old Viscount died. They asked me what abnormal behavior the old Viscount had over the years. I wasn't even 10 years old at the time, so I don't know anything." Rafter waved his arms and growled under his breath. "Calm down, please calm down." Klein lowered his left hand and attempted to confirm if Baronet Pound knew of the underground structure via multiple angles. Time flew by as the question and answer session ensued. Klein said in a hoarse voice, "You really don't seem to know anything. I'm very sorry to bother you, but it's time for me to leave. He stood up, bowed slightly, and appeared very well-mannered. And almost at the same time, the excitement and appearance of having a breakdown on Rafter Pound's face vanished. His light blue eyes became abnormally deep, as though he was examining something. When he saw the intruder about to stand up straight, he immediately reverted back to his previous performance: grief, anger, madness, bitterness, and neuroticism. At that moment, a mysterious voice suddenly resounded in his ears. Crimson. Klein injected spirituality into a slumber charm and threw it at Rafter with his unarmed left hand. Amidst crisp crackling sounds, a strong sense of serenity spread out, enveloping the baronet, causing him to shut his eyes involuntarily and fall weakly onto the bed. I'm sorry. The questions from before are for the comparison of what shall ensue. Next, it's the process of entering your dream and spirit channeling. Klein patted Rafter's pajamas, and with his hand on his chest, he made another bow. Then, he used the dream charm and entered Rafter's dream like a nightmare. In the gray, fragmentary, constantly coruscating world, Klein soberly walked beside Rafter, watching him see the blank faces of the servants and maids who had no facial features as they gave off abnormal and frightening vibes. He saw Rafter turning his head only to always to see an old face silently gazing at him, watching him curl up in the corner, shivering, and him being enveloped by a shadow, little by little. This matches what he had described earlier. Klein tried to guide the dream to make sense of the situation, but it was as though Baronet Pound had a very serious psychological trauma over these matters. Any tiny bit of stimulation would cause him to scream and run like a madman in his dreams. This made it impossible for Klein to get any more information. Thus, he withdrew from the dream and cast another slumber charm on Rafter Pound before taking out Amantha extract and other materials, in preparation to channel his spirit in a mediumship ritual. After responding to himself, Klein's spirituality passed through the storm of thoughts and saw the illusory image of Rafter, an illusory image based on the body of heart and mind. What did the old Viscount say to you before he died? Klein hesitated for a moment before asking. Rafter Pound muddle-headedly replied, he wants me to maintain the family. What else? Klein asked again in a tone of deliberate affirmation. He wanted me to remember the glory of the ancestors, Rafter answered blankly. Klein nodded and asked, what were those people looking for? I don't know. Rafter gave the same answer. Klein continued asking and compared it with the answers Pound had said before, finally coming to the conclusion that Baronet Pound had not lied, and what he had just said was true. At this point, he didn't stay any longer. He passed through the storm of thoughts and allowed his extended spirituality to return to his body. Next, Klein methodically tidied up the scene and tossed Azek's copper whistle a few times, using its nature to interfere with any possible divination investigations. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Baronet. After doing all of this, Klein bowed once again. Then he turned, opened the window, jumped into the street, and disappeared into the night. After a while, Rafter Pound suddenly opened his eyes. Around those light blue eyes, there was a circle of ruptured capillaries. He flipped himself up suddenly and stared at the open oriel window. After making a long detour to East Borough, Klein washed his disguise and changed into normal clothes. As if nothing had happened, he returned to 15, Minsk Street in Sherwood Borough. He didn't rest, nor did he think about what he should do with the underground structure. Instead, he once again entered the fog. At the very end of the ancient long table, Klein slowly opened his palm, revealing several strands of brown hair. They were Rafter Pound's hair he had gathered when Rafter was sleeping. There's still the final step, confirming with divination above the grey fog. Klein silently muttered to himself, then he conjured a pen and paper. He wrote down the content that he had already thought about beforehand, Rafter Pound's future. I want to see what will happen to you in the future so as to confirm the past. Klein leaned back in his chair and began to recite the divination statement. As the ancient structure involved the 6 orthodox gods, he was afraid that there would be problems if he divined something directly, so he changed his way of thinking and helped Rafter Pound ask about the future. Chapter 277, Rafter Pound's Future. Klein held on to the baronet's hair, closed his eyes, and entered a deep slumber with the help of cogitation. In the grey gloomy world, he saw a narrow, irregular cave. Rafter Pound, with his puffy eye bags and grey hair at his temples, was propping himself up on his elbows, crawling forward like a reptile to leave the hole. Then, with a flash, he retrieved a black iron emblem of unknown origins and wore it on his chest. The emblem had a scepter carved on it, as well as a hand that was holding onto the scepter tightly. Tutor. Klein jerked out of the dream and sat up. According to Miss Bodyguard's introduction, the black iron emblem was engraved with the imperial coat of arms of the Fourth Epoch's Tudor Empire royal household. It was identical to the one he had seen in the ancient structure. Rafter Pound is definitely not as simple as he seems to be. Klein rubbed his forehead and muttered to himself. As a seer, he had his own interpretation of the revelation he had received from the dream. On the one hand, he knew that it was something Rafter Pound would do in the future, and on the other hand, he believed that it meant that Rafter Pound had a deep connection with the Tudor family. Through the 3 tests of direct questioning, dream probing, and spirit channeling, Rafter Pound didn't expose any problems, nor did he make me notice that anything was amiss. If I didn't have a 4th test, I probably would have been deceived by him. Yes. Maybe he really doesn't know anything at present and that it was a true act. In the future, he might even chance upon an opportunity to form a connection with the Tudor family, but it's more likely that he has already learned a lot from the old Viscount. Without confidence, he intentionally turned decadent and acted crazy and ignorant. For him to be able to hide from my dream and spirit channeling, it should be a result of some beyonder powers. He probably wasn't acting at that time and was really in a muddled state. Otherwise, he would have exposed himself in front of a person like me who is very experienced in such matters. What beyonder powers could it be? What sequence number is he? Or is he the kind that is born with certain beyonder powers? Klein proceeded this line of thought and soon realized he had reached a dead end. He quickly pulled himself out of this dead end and changed his angle of thinking. Rafter Pound has a deep connection with the Tudor family. Can I make a bold hypothesis that he's actually a descendant of the Tudor family? If the blood relationship between him and the old Viscount is real, then things are going to be interesting. The entire Pound family is a branch of the Tudor family that changed its surname to escape pursuit. They contributed tremendously and were conferred aristocratic titles, and they returned to the center of power, one step at a time. Meanwhile, they were secretly searching for the secret remains left behind by the Tudor Empire in Backland. After an unknown period of time, they finally found something. Thus, they bought what currently belongs to Millet Carter's house and built an exaggerated basement, which was used to explore the surrounding area. 30 to 40 years ago, they found the ruins and built a secret door to it. But, during the exploration process, an accident occurred. That evil spirit didn't recognize any of the so-called Tudor descendants at all. The 2 heirs of the old Viscount died in that room, in the deepest corner, one after the other. Even their beyonder characteristics and mystical items couldn't be retrieved. Although the old Viscount spent a great price to buy similar beyonder characteristics, making it seem like the 2 heirs had died relatively normal deaths, the consecutive deaths made the royal household and the churches suspicious. Therefore, after the old Viscount passed away, Rafter Pound deliberately exaggerated and distorted the secret investigations of the past, to frighten himself into having mental problems. He began to engage in debauchery so as to avoid the attention of others. This can explain what previously puzzled me. How can a Viscount family be placed under the control of some mysterious person without any action from the royal household and the churches? Even if controlling him was necessary, they would do it in a milder and undetectable manner. For example, using a faceless of my sequence 6 pathway. A child can even sense something abnormal, much less the powerful beyonders of the royal household and the 3 churches. The reason why they were unaware can only be explained by the fact that they were the ones who had sent those people. Yes. Back then, I surmised that the Tudor family and the Trunsoist family grasped the Dark Emperor pathway, so due to the need to act, they would establish dynasties to maintain the style and uniqueness of the Solomon Empire. On this point, Miss Bodyguard has indirectly proven it. The Dark Emperor pathway's sequence 9 is lawyer, a beyonder job that is extremely good at using order. Yes. Rafter Pound was able to deceive my dream and spirit channeling abilities because of this. Perhaps he's gone one step further. He cooperated with me sufficiently, so in his muddled state in the dream, he was still able to subconsciously use the loophole of order and affect the development in the direction he wishes to have. Upon careful consideration, during the process of spirit channeling, Rafter Pound didn't seem to really lie. However, his truth was only a partial truth. Maintain the family, and, remember the glory, can be referring to the Pound family and also the Tudor family. Klein's train of thought became clearer bit by bit, and he had an overall assessment of the situation. From Rafter Pound's current attitude, the evil spirit shouldn't be able to escape without any external help, otherwise, the baronet would have long thought of a way to save himself. It doesn't matter if the evil spirit would come looking for him, as long as it escapes the seal and creates a disaster. The secret of the underground ruins would be exposed to the royal household and the churches. When that happens, Rafter will definitely be implicated. The room opposite had collapsed, but it didn't affect the power that restricted the evil spirit. This means that as long as the innermost room isn't directly destroyed, the evil spirit wouldn't be able to escape. The plan is clear then. I would buy some explosives from Casper's and collapse the entrance so that no one can get in, leaving the evil spirit buried underground forever. When I'm powerful enough, I can consider finishing it and help the citizens of Backlund get rid of this latent danger and harvest some valuable items in the process. However, how should I collapse it safely? I don't know anything. Maybe Casper's knows a demolition expert. After all, he is a black market weapons merchant. Klein quickly finalized the plan and decided on finding Casper's tomorrow evening. He would try to settle the matter of the underground ruins within the week. As for the true relationship between the Pound family and the Tudor family, and for Rafter's abnormality, he didn't want to probe too deeply into it. It's none of my business. Klein grumbled and quickly plummeted down past the gray fog and returned to the real world. On Friday morning, Klein went out early as usual and pretended to be very busy. The truth was, he had once again gone to the Quelag Club to practice his shooting and read the newspapers. He enjoyed himself quite a bit. At tea time, he was about to leave after staying there the entire day, but he was surprised to see Mary Gale, his former employer, and Talon Dumont, the equestrian teacher, enter the club at the same time. They were accompanied by a number of gentlemen in double-breasted frock coats and beautiful ladies in fine makeup. Among them was the Daily Observer reporter, Mike Joseph. Oh, Detective Moriarty, what a coincidence. Mike, with his charming eyes but rather rough skin, took the initiative to greet him. Klein smiled and replied, Mr. Reporter, are you done with your investigative news? It's done, thanks to your help. Let me do the introductions. This is the famous detective, Mr. Sherlock Moriarty, a good friend of Talon's. Mike waved his arm and said. After both sides greeted each other, Mike continued, I've roughly figured out who Capim is. I'll tell you in detail when I have the time. In short, I have every reason to believe that Sibber's death was caused by a copycat killer and not by the serial killer. You will see the news of my investigations on the papers tomorrow. It's just as I thought. Klein smiled in response. At that moment, Mike seemed to remember something and turned his head to Mary Gale and said, I'll make an appointment with you for an interview regarding the air pollution situation in Backlund and its solution. However, you have to communicate with my editor-in-chief in advance to finalize the page and time. Mary's eyes lit up. All right. Thank you very much. Mike, why didn't I think of such a good idea? This is for the promotion of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council. This reporter, Mike, has quite a lot of experience after all. Although the Daily Observer isn't one of the best newspapers, its circulation is considerable. Did Mary suddenly come here today because the other members of the House of Commons who are members of this club were coming? This type of private club is indeed suitable for politics and business. Klein seemed to gain an understanding and bade farewell ahead of time. Before becoming a faceless, he didn't want to get involved in high-level affairs such as this. Evening, in an apartment in East Borough. After a busy day, Williams entered the small room he rented, intending to change his coat, get some money, go to the pub for a drink, and settle his dinner there. In the gloomy darkness, he suddenly stopped putting on his coat. He saw a shadow standing by the window, its face completely obscured by the shadow of the hood. "Who told you to look for Lenivas?" The dark figure asked in a low, slow voice. Williams quickly put on his coat, gulped his saliva, and said, "I have a friend, a bounty hunter." Bounty hunters referred to adventurers who used various bounty rewards as their main source of income. There were a lot of them in East Borough and in Backland. Why did he suddenly start looking for Lenivas? This is a bounty that was offered a long time ago. The black figure was extremely tall. Step by step, he approached Williams. "I don't know. Maybe she just wanted to attempt another bounty." Williams took a very tiny step back. The dark figure pressed hoarsely, "Who is she?" Williams immediately entered a dilemma, but after a few seconds, he replied with a trembling voice, "Zio Dericha. I don't know where she lives." "Very good, very honest." The black figure reached out and patted Williams's body. Without further ado, he walked towards the door. Williams secretly heaved a sigh of relief, believing that his rich experience in the underworld had helped him. Don't try to be brave when you shouldn't. At that moment, he saw the shadow snap his fingers. "Pa!" Williams's thoughts froze, and his body suddenly split into pieces, scattering in all directions, splattering the ground and walls with flesh and blood. Then, the shadow broke the gas pipe. Amidst the sound of gas spewing out from the pipes, he picked up the candle from Williams's desk and struck it against the wick. The black shadow left immediately. A few minutes later, the candle suddenly lit up by itself. Boom! The explosion wiped out everything. Chapter 278, 278 After dinner, in the billiard room of the Bravehearts bar. Dressed in a simple black coat and a dark cap, Klein held a glass of Southville beer, closed the door behind him, and walked over to Caspers, who was bent over the table, trying to hit the ball. Before he could muster a smile and say hello, Caspers stopped what he was doing, straightened up, and glanced at him. "Marek isn't here. There are no other gatherings you want." "I have nothing but weapons. Very familiar with what I want. Fortunately, I have a different goal today." Klein curled the corner of his lips and said, "I'm here to buy weapons." "Marek isn't here. From the looks of it, they've been exposed and are targeted by their enemies. They've decided to switch locations. Then I won't be able to contact Miss Bodyguard. And I was planning on tricking Millet Carter with Marek's zombies as my helpers. They'll keep a secret, they're obedient, and they're unafraid of death. Well, the premise of their obedience is when the influence of Azek's copper whistle is shielded." As he spoke, a series of thoughts flashed through Klein's mind. Caspers was slightly surprised. With a look of suspicion, he leaned against his cue stick and rubbed his brandy nose and said, "What kind of weapon are you looking to buy? Have you finished the previous bullets? That's quite a lot of practice." "No, I practiced with bullets I bought at the Quelag Club." Klein smiled. "I want to buy explosives, the kind that is widely used in mines." "What do you want to do?" Caspers blurted out as his expression turned solemn and stern. "I'm warning you, don't try to do anything condemnable. I won't allow my customers to challenge Civilau's yard. Of course, you don't have to buy weapons from me. To be able to become a black market weapon merchant and live, to this day, from a certain point of view, he must abide strictly by the rules. At the very least, he wouldn't sell to those crazy fellows. Klein habitually gave his evaluation from a nighthawk's point of view and smiled. You seem to have misunderstood something. I'm not going to blast open the door of a bank vault or try to create any sensational news. I'm helping someone with the demolition of a building, making it easier for subsequent renovations. Then why didn't he find a proper construction company? Kaspers didn't let down his guard. That's a secret chamber. He doesn't want others to know about it. Klein switched to asking, do you know any reliable explosives experts? I'm not very good at this sort of thing, and I'm afraid the whole house will collapse. When Kaspers saw that Klein was making considerations to ensure that the house remained in good condition, the doubt in his mind was immediately dispelled quite significantly. Just as he was deliberating for an answer, an illusory voice suddenly rang out in the room. There's no need. A familiar feeling came over Klein. He quickly turned around and found Miss Bodyguard sitting on a chair in the corner without him realizing it. She was still wearing her black Gothic regal dress and matching soft hat. Her face was as pale as ever, and her blonde hair and delicate features accentuated each other. Good evening, madam. Klein slightly bent his back and bowed. Good evening, ma'am. Sharon. Kaspers did the same. So her name is Sharon. Klein thoughtfully waited for her to speak. The lady named Sharon looked at Kaspers and said, Marek won't be coming back here again. If you need him for anything, leave a message according to the third method. Yes, ma'am. Sharon. Kaspers, who had clearly seen a lot of things in his life, seemed to have an instinctive fear of Miss Bodyguard. Upon hearing this, Klein interrupted, if I wanted to get Marek's help, how should I get in touch with him? Through Kaspers, Sharon answered simply. All right. Klein spread out his hands and said, oh yeah, what did you mean when you said there's no need for a demolition expert? Sharon's blue eyes didn't waver in the slightest. I am one. You are one. You're a demolition expert. Wait a minute, aren't you a beyonder with special abilities, probably at sequence 5? Why are you being a part-time demolition expert? Klein froze as he felt at a loss for words. In the end, he chose to believe Miss Bodyguard as he said in deliberation, I'm going to visit. Before he could finish, he looked at Kaspers. It was indicative that the ensuing topic wasn't suitable for this ordinary person. Fundamentally, due to his body, a black market weapons dealer is indeed considered an ordinary person. Klein silently added. Sharon looked at Kaspers and said, prepare the explosives. £2. He'll pay. Yes, ma'am. Sharon. Kaspers glanced at Klein and limped out of the billiard room, not forgetting to close the door behind him. Seeing Miss Bodyguard looking at him silently, Klein felt like he was being watched by a ghost. He quickly organized his words and said, I found Baronet Pound's address and visited him in the middle of the night. After recounting everything that Rafter Pound had told him, Klein began to deduce the process from the story. I think he lied in many areas, and it's impossible for a Viscount family to be so easily manipulated. If a child can notice something abnormal, how can the royal household and the churches not sense anything? After Rafter Pound degenerated, he had many chances to interact with outsiders and other aristocratic members. As long as he showed a little courage, he would be able to easily resolve the problem. Therefore, I think he must have been hiding something that has a high chance of being related to the underground structure. From the state of his mind, it seems that the evil spirit won't be able to escape for a long period of time, so I plan to get some explosives and destroy the entrance to prevent others from getting in. I'm afraid that I might accidentally release the evil spirit. Yes. Miss Bodyguard Sharon didn't confirm Klein's guess, but she didn't reject it either. At that moment, Klein hesitated and asked, I don't know much about demolition, so I'm preparing to draw a layout and hire a demolition expert to give me the positions to lay the explosives and their corresponding weights. If I ask you for help again, how much would I have to pay? If it's too expensive, it'd better for me to look for an ordinary demolition expert. After all, I'm getting only £50 from this, while Miss Bodyguard charges £1,000 for 3 days. Klein had already made plans. Free. Sharon's answer was still in her usual style of being terse. Free. Klein was shocked. From what he knew, free things cost the most. Sharon sat quietly for a few seconds before giving a brief explanation. After collapsing the entrance, I'll be the only one capable of entering and exiting. This was what I wished to do. In other words, after you're confident enough, you plan on getting rid of the evil spirit and harvest the items within? In fact, destroying the entrance is to help you eliminate any interferences or the greed of others. After all, other beyonders of other sequences are unable to pass through the boulders and dirt like a spirit. Yes, apart from the apprentice pathway, but they don't know about that underground structure. Klein nodded in enlightenment. Deal. After saying that, he hurriedly added, Can you borrow a few more subordinates from Merrick, subordinates with a tight lip? They'll be helpers to show to Millet Carter. All right. Sharon didn't refuse. Klein deliberately didn't mention making any payment for that as he smiled. Then, let's schedule it for 10 in the morning tomorrow. We have to explore the surrounding terrain in advance. We can't let the explosion cause any obvious damage. Sharon nodded slightly as her figure faded away into nothingness. Saturday morning, Zio Dericha once again rode in a public carriage to the East Borough to confirm any results that her commissions might have. While waiting for the transfer, she suddenly had the urge to buy a newspaper to read. She took out a penny and bought a copy of the Backlund Bulletin from a paperboy next to her. She quickly read through it. Suddenly, her eyes froze because of the news article on the 3rd page. At 7:10 last night, there was a serious explosion in the apartment building at 1 Dharavi Street in East Borough. It's suspected to be a result of a gas leak. The explosion happened at unit #03-06. The tenant died on the spot, to the point of not leaving a complete corpse. At press time, this explosion resulted in 3 deaths and 16 injured, 1 Dharavi Street. Apartment #03-06. Isn't this the place Williams rents? He's dead. He died from a gas leak explosion. No. Absolutely impossible. He would never be so extravagant and use gas, even if there was an installation there. Did he end up like this because he had just accepted my commission? But Lenevis is a wanted criminal. If he discovers that someone was looking for him, all he should need to do is move. There's no need to kill people to keep it a secret. Doing so would instead expose problems. The way this was done is too weird and radical, it's like it was done by a lunatic. He's clearly just a swindler. Poor Williams. I will definitely avenge you. I'll definitely find out the truth. Zio looked sadly and gravely at the public carriage parked in front of her and didn't choose to board it. She knew that it would be very dangerous to head to East Borough now. She intended to go back at once and tell Furs to get her to move to a spare rental house. Then, she would head to East Borough in a disguise and ask someone familiar to gain a preliminary understanding of the reason and find traces of the killer's tracks. Sigh, it's true that none of Miss Audrey's commissions are without danger. I thought that as long as I didn't stop someone who is already a wanted swindler and didn't stop him from escaping, he wouldn't retaliate in such a vicious manner. I was careless. I was the one who caused Williams's death. Well, that didn't exclude the possibility that he was also gathering information on other matters, thereby bringing about disaster. Zio closed her eyes and crossed the street to the waiting area on the other side. At 10:14, after confirming the surface conditions of the 4th epoch structure, Klein and Miss Bodyguard, Sharon, arrived outside the building at 8 William Street. Sharon had already vanished, and Millet Carter saw Detective Sherlock Moriarty in his grayish-blue worker's uniform and cap and his 3 taciturn assistants. It's convenient to explore like this, Klein explained. Millet Carter's eyes swept across the three assistants who were obviously good at fighting and nodded in satisfaction. Your preparations were quicker than I expected. Is one of them a snake-repelling expert? Yes, they're very good at repelling snakes. Klein didn't hesitate to give an affirmative answer. How could a zombie be afraid of being bitten by snakes? Chapter 279. In the dark underground structure, Klein walked around the hall with a raised lantern in his hand. He thoroughly checked to see if there were any other entrances. Of course, he didn't dare enter the tunnel that led to the innermost room, and the newly gathered snakes were, once again, blown away by a biting cold wind. After receiving confirmation, he took the initiative to retreat to the side of the gate, where he watched, along with the three zombies, as Sharon placed explosives at different locations. She looks very professional. Klein sighed softly. And without a doubt, the three zombies didn't respond to his musings. However, there was a reason for this. He kept using his spirituality to wrap Azek's copper whistle so as to shield against its negative effects, otherwise, he would have encountered their abnormally passionate response. He had no intention of bringing this ancient and exquisite copper whistle with him originally, but considering that he had to guard against the evil spirit's manipulations, he could only sacrifice some of his spirituality. Miss Bodyguard, no, Miss Sharon said that she's a demolition expert, and from the looks of it, she really isn't bragging. Was she in this line of work in the past? Or does one of her sequences in her Beyonder pathway make her skilled in this domain? According to the information I read back in the Nighthawks, a few candidates like Sequence 9 Criminal, Prisoner, Warrior, and Hunter, Sequence 8 Sheriff, and Sequence 7 Weapon Master and Knowledge Keeper. The latter has a nickname, Detective. It's part of the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. As for the rest, I'm completely clueless. I wonder which pathway Miss Sharon is. Nothing seems to match, and she even showed her ability to command the zombies. While Klein's thoughts wandered and made all sorts of associations, Sharon finished setting up the explosives and, in passing, lit the fuse. In passing? Lighting the fuse? Hey! Why didn't you give any warning? Only then did Klein jolt back to his senses and was startled. He quickly rushed out of the hall and entered the corridor outside. As for the three zombies, they calmly followed behind him. It's very safe here. Sharon suddenly appeared and floated beside him. Klein breathed a sigh of relief and asked, "Will dust fall from the tremors over here?" "Yes," Sharon answered with a single word. "That's good." As he spoke, Klein took another step back. The hissing sound of the fuse burning reached his ears, making him feel slightly irritated. It wasn't because he was afraid of the explosion that followed, but because he couldn't feel at ease. Sharon said suddenly. Huh? Klein didn't understand what she meant. Rumble. The earth shook violently, and plumes of dust fell from above. Klein's ears buzzed, and for a moment he couldn't hear anything else. If it wasn't for the fact that he was a clown, he would have lost his balance and collapsed to the ground. Cough. 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 Having been distracted and caught unaware, he started to cough. He saw boulders and mud rapidly falling in front of him as they instantly blocked the entrance. During the remaining tremors, Klein gripped the copper whistle given to him by Mr. Azek and observed its reaction. Although he had divined beforehand that his expedition would be safe, he didn't dare to believe it completely, even if it was a revelation gained from above the grey fog, since it involved the statues of the 6 Orthodox gods. Therefore, he cautiously judged whether or not the evil spirit was freed with the help of Azek's copper whistle. The copper whistle's surface was cold but mild, and it had no abnormal changes. Completely relieved, Klein looked at the zombies beside him and confirmed one thing from their eyes: his face was very dirty right now. That's good. It's in line with how I'm going to explain this to old Mr. Millet Carter. I didn't waste my effort in changing into a different set of clothes. He walked to the entrance and confirmed that it was completely blocked. Without causing too much of a commotion, it's true that only those from the apprentice path and beyonders like Miss Sharon can enter in the future. By doing so, she has ruled out many potential competitors. No wonder it was free. Klein looked at the boulders and dirt before sighing. Of course, I can too. I have a condition similar to a spirit body. He silently added this sentence inwardly with a smile, but his expression didn't change at all. Let's call it a day. With an exaggerated snap of his fingers, Klein led the 3 zombies back to the basement of the house. As for Sharon, she had already disappeared. In the spacious basement, Millet Carter was nervously pacing back and forth, looking at the secret door from time to time. As soon as he saw Detective Moriarty and his assistant's exit, he let out a long breath and asked anxiously, what happened inside? Klein deliberately panted and said, that underground structure is too old, it hasn't been repaired in a long time. We were driving the snakes away, but with just a little bit of movement, it collapsed. The whole area has collapsed, but luckily we were close to the door and managed to escape in time. Holy Lord of Storms! That structure was that dangerous? Millet Carter pounded his left breast. Yes, there are always only a few ancient buildings that can be preserved. The rest would have collapsed in the river of history, Klein answered. I'll bring you in to confirm the situation. Will there be more collapses? Millet asked cautiously. No, this area is quite sturdy. Klein deliberately patted the dust off his body and coughed twice. He then led his employer in and stopped at the entrance that was completely blocked. The walls near the hall had also collapsed, leaving behind only stones and dirt. You can use this area. He pointed to the corridor area. Millet was silent for a few seconds before he sighed. Thank goodness I didn't hastily send someone in to explore but instead went to look for you, a professional. Otherwise, I would have had to bear the burden of the loss of several lives. Alright, this commission ends here. I'll pay you the rest of the reward. As he spoke, Millet Carter took out his wallet, did a count, and was somewhat embarrassed to find that there were only about £30 in cash. Fortunately, I still have other forms of money, otherwise, I'd have to go to the bank, Millet mumbled as he looked up at Klein. Do you mind taking gold coins? No, I don't mind any form of money. Klein smiled. The gold pound of the Lone Kingdom could be in the form of gold coins unless they were of huge denominations. This was the guarantee of the denomination on paper money. However, in the past 100 years after Emperor Roselle, the people of the northern continent had become more and more accustomed to paper money. There were even some members of parliament who wanted notes to replace copper pennies. Gold, in the true sense of the word, already hardly ever circulated in the market. Only some of the old gentlemen would attach a fixed box on the other end of their pocket watch chains which contained some gold in case of accidents. It was to give them peace of mind and was also a habit. Millet nodded, and following the gold chain on his clothes, he pulled out a box that flickered with golden light from a certain pocket. He opened the box, took out 5 gold coins, and handed them together with the notes he had previously counted to the detective. Klein didn't hide his actions as he counted the money and suddenly flicked a gold coin and caught it coolly. Thank you for your generosity. He glanced up at the statue and smiled sincerely. Then he pressed his hand to his chest and bowed whilst facing Millet Carter. Yes, if it were any other detective, even if they demolished the entrance and the passageway, they would definitely have nightmares upon returning. They would hear things at home, and their minds will turn weak. They would feel like they're being watched all the time and experience other problems. That's the corruption of the evil spirit's aura. It will take a very long time before the effects disappear, but we're different. Miss Sharon is like a ghost to begin with. As for me, I'll be completely fine once I go above the grey fog. As for the 3 zombies, they aren't even afraid of death, so what's there to be afraid of? Klein lampooned while in a good mood as he bade Millet Cullen farewell and left his house. Arriving on the street, without even informing him, the 3 zombies walked in another direction. Miss Sharon is gone. She really didn't collect any money for the zombies. Klein smiled as he raised his arm and waved at the departing backs of the 3 zombies. Then, he went home and changed into his normal clothes and headed for the Quelag Club to practice shooting. After also settling his dinner there as a reward for the successful completion of his mission, Klein returned to Minsk Street in a public carriage. The dark, gloomy environment was illuminated by gas lamps, and with his cane, he strolled leisurely along the street. Suddenly, he had a premonition which wasn't too good or bad. What's going on? When Klein looked up, he saw 2 police constables with a dog on a leash, apparently investigating the streets. Investigation? An investigation with a police dog? Is this a result of the serial killings? The scene of the murder had the smell of cloves and gooseberries, so they included a police dog. Klein couldn't help but silently lampoon. The history of dogs dated back as far as the Roselle period, but the numbers had always been small. Considering that he had many things on him, and considering his earlier premonition, Klein decided to take a detour. But at that moment, the 2 policemen saw him and signaled for him to stop. The corner of Klein's mouth twitched as he waited in place with a smile on his face. Routine investigation. As they approached, one of the officers showed his identification documents. All right. Before Klein could finish his sentence, the police dog suddenly growled at him and barked endlessly. Is it because of the smell of gunpowder on me? The smell of gunpowder from my afternoon practice? Klein instantly realized what was happening. He looked at the faces of the 2 officers who were now on alert. With a thought, he smiled and said, "It's this, I picked up a revolver along the way, along with an armpit holster and bullets. I was planning on handing them over to the police." Slowly, he took out his revolver, raised his hands to his shoulders, and added with a serious smile, "Officers, I really am not bearing a gun illegally." As one constable remained on high alert, the other constable received the revolver and said seriously, "You have to come back to the police station with us." "All right," Klein returned with a radiant smile. "But I have a request. Please inform my lawyer, Mr. Jürgen Cooper. I will only accept a body search with him around." Chapter 280 in a corner of East Borough. A drunken Xian faced the wall, pulled off his pants, and began watering the moss in comfort. When he was done, someone suddenly patted his shoulder. Xian couldn't help but shiver a few times. He picked up his pants and half turned to see a short boy in a canvas jacket and cap. The boy raised his head, revealing a mild and delicate face despite looking dirty. "Zio? Why are you dressed like that?" Xian blurted out in surprise. Zio put her index finger to her lips to indicate the need for silence. Then, she suppressed her voice and said, "I'll ask and you answer. Keep your voice down." Astonished by her awe-inspiring presence, Xian could only nod. "Which of the guys, that Williams knew, have died within the past 2 days?" Zio asked in a low voice. Xian used his alcohol-paralyzed brain to carefully think for a while and said, "Gavin. Gavin was found to have drowned in the Tussock River this morning. He probably fell into the river last night. The poor sod doesn't know how to swim and likes to enjoy the wind by the river when he's drunk." Zio's gaze suddenly became sharp. Without any hesitation, she asked, "Did Gavin accept Williams's request to look for the wanted criminal, Lenevis?" "Of course, we all got this commission from Williams. Anyway, it's not like it's a big deal. All we have to do is show the portrait to everyone we know and keep an eye out for someone who looks like him. Oh, Williams, he said that if there's a clue, he'll treat me to 3 days of booze and meat. The poor fellow actually died in a gas explosion. That's why I refused to have my landlord install a gas pipe." That was months ago. I can only afford a cheap motel now," Jean droned on. "What region is Gavin in charge of? Did he mention anything to you?" Zio looked sideways, pursed her lips, and stared straight at Xian. He usually goes to the dock area near the East Balham dock. He even met me yesterday evening and said that he went to the Workers' Alliance Tavern there to spread the news of his search for Lenevis, and he also showed the portrait of Lenevis to everyone present. Jean hiccuped. There were many docks in Backlund, most of which were considered as the dock area and designated as shipyards. And after that? Did Gavin say what he was going to do? Zio asked again, frowning doubtfully. Of course, drinking. He planned to have a good drink and then find a place to sleep. Oh, the poor sod must have felt hot from drinking and wanted to take a bath in the river, but he forgot he couldn't swim, and it's almost winter. Zion sighed again. Gavin didn't discover anything. He had gone to the Workers' Alliance Tavern in East Balham Dock and distributed leaflets to search for Lenevis, but ended up meeting his demise. It even implicated Williams. The murderer's reaction can no longer be described as extreme anymore. He's simply a lunatic. If I were Lenevis, the easiest option would be to immediately move somewhere else and avoid being found. Unless he's embroiled in something and cannot leave anytime soon. But I wasn't the only one looking for him. There are also many bounty hunters. He may kill Williams, but can he kill that many people? If he had the ability, he would kill off everyone who spread wanted posters in Civilau's yard. Zio was completely befuddled by the entire matter, just like how she found Williams's death was impossible. In the end, she decided to report the problem to Miss Audrey first, and then head to the Workers' Alliance Tavern in East Balham in disguise. She wouldn't make any inquiries and only observe to see if there was anyone suspicious. Sherwood Borough. Rice Police Station. Once again, Klein found himself huddled on a backrest-equipped bench with thieves and drunkards. How unlucky. To think that I would run into the police and fail to take a detour in time. It's all because of that damn serial killer. As Klein cursed that particular person, he thought about how to hide his charms and the herbal powder he couldn't explain away and dodged the body search that followed. He had tried to put them in his black gloves, then find a chance to slip them into a hidden spot in the police station, only to retrieve them when he left. Just then, his eyes lit up and he saw the young lawyer, Jürgen Cooper, with his hair neatly combed back. He was dressed like he was attending a banquet. Just as Cooper came over, he was accompanied by a police constable. "You can leave after signing your name," Jürgen said with his usual serious expression. "Is that all?" Klein asked in surprise. Jürgen nodded slightly. "Yes, they know you're a well-known detective." "What kind of reason is this?" Klein didn't dare to ask further. He immediately got up and followed after Jürgen, who was wearing a long black tweed coat. He signed his name at a leisurely pace before leaving. The weather was different from the last time he was led out from the police station by Jürgen. There was no rain and only thick clouds obscuring the crimson moon and stars. The streets were illuminated by gas lamps that lined both sides of the streets. "Thank you so much. I've troubled you once again." Klein briskly walked forward and came to Jürgen's side. Jürgen turned his head to look at him and said to him without a smile, "There's no need to thank me. This is my job. £2. Klein sized him up seriously and revealed a smile. "Okay." His wallet was bulging recently, and he produced 2 £1 notes at once. Without a trace of politeness, Jürgen received the payment and said, "If you're willing to enter into a formal partnership, then every time you come to the police station, I'll only charge you £1. Of course, not for the cases that are serious. You have to understand that a large portion of the fees I charge will go to the office. It's as if I would frequently be invited to the police station for some coffee in the future." "Pooey, they don't even give coffee. Theirs isn't even a cup of water." Before Klein could answer, he heard Jürgen add. "For a private detective, getting in and out of the police station is something that happens every once in a while. It's an occupational hazard. Well, I know very well that every private detective has a problem with the illegal bearing of arms and the illegal trespassing in other people's homes. Your response this time was very good. The police couldn't find enough evidence to prove that you were bearing a gun illegally, and the explanation for the gunpowder reaction on your body was quite sufficient. The name Quelag Club was enough to convince them, otherwise, you most likely would have had to go to the magistrate's court. So, you're not a suspect, but a good citizen. A good citizen who picked up a gun and handed it in, so there was no need for a body search. Chapter 280 in a corner of East Borough. A drunken Xian faced the wall, pulled off his pants, and began watering the moss in comfort. When he was done, someone suddenly patted his shoulder. Xian couldn't help but shiver a few times. He picked up his pants and half-turned to see a short boy in a canvas jacket and cap. The boy raised his head, revealing a mild and delicate face despite looking dirty. "Zio? Why are you dressed like that?" Xian blurted out in surprise. Zio put her index finger to her lips to indicate the need for silence. Then, she suppressed her voice and said, "I'll ask and you answer. Keep your voice down." Astonished by her awe-inspiring presence, Xian could only nod. "Which of the guys, that Williams knew, have died within the past 2 days?" Zio asked in a low voice. Xian used his alcohol-paralyzed brain to carefully think for a while and said, "Gavin. Gavin was found to have drowned in the Tussock River this morning. He probably fell into the river last night. The poor sod doesn't know how to swim and likes to enjoy the wind by the river when he's drunk." Zio's gaze suddenly became sharp. Without any hesitation, she asked, "Did Gavin accept Williams's request to look for the wanted criminal, Lanivis?" "Of course, we all got this commission from Williams. Anyway, it's not like it's a big deal. All we have to do is show the portrait to everyone we know and keep an eye out for someone who looks like him. Oh, Williams, he said that if there's a clue, he'll treat me to 3 days of booze and meat. The poor fellow actually died in a gas explosion. That's why I refused to have my landlord install a gas pipe." That was months ago. I can only afford a cheap motel now," Jean droned on. "What region is Gavin in charge of? Did he mention anything to you?" Zio looked sideways, pursed her lips, and stared straight at Xian. He usually goes to the dock area near the East Balham dock. He even met me yesterday evening and said that he went to the Workers' Alliance Tavern there to spread the news of his search for Lanivis, and he also showed the portrait of Lanivis to everyone present." Jean hiccuped. There were many docks in Backlund, most of which were considered as the dock area and designated as shipyards. "And after that? Did Gavin say what he was going to do?" Zio asked again, frowning doubtfully. "Of course, drinking. He planned to have a good drink and then find a place to sleep. Oh, the poor sod must have felt hot from drinking and wanted to take a bath in the river, but he forgot he couldn't swim, and it's almost winter." Xian sighed again. Gavin didn't discover anything. He had gone to the Workers' Alliance Tavern in East Balham Dock and distributed leaflets to search for Lanivis, but ended up meeting his demise. It even implicated Williams. The murderer's reaction can no longer be described as extreme anymore. "He's simply a lunatic. If I were Lanivis, the easiest option would be to immediately move somewhere else and avoid being found. Unless he's embroiled in something and cannot leave anytime soon. But I wasn't the only one looking for him. There are also many bounty hunters. He may kill Williams, but can he kill that many people? If he had the ability, he would kill off everyone who spread wanted posters in Civilau's yard." Zio was completely befuddled by the entire matter, just like how she found Williams's death was impossible. In the end, she decided to report the problem to Miss Audrey first, and then head to the Workers' Alliance Tavern in East Balham in disguise. She wouldn't make any inquiries and only observe to see if there was anyone suspicious. Sherwood Borough. Rice Police Station. Once again, Klein found himself huddled on a backrest-equipped bench with thieves and drunkards. How unlucky. To think that I would run into the police and fail to take a detour in time. It's all because of that damn serial killer. As Klein cursed that particular person, he thought about how to hide his charms and the herbal powder he couldn't explain away and dodged the body search that followed. He had tried to put them in his black gloves, then find a chance to slip them into a hidden spot in the police station, only to retrieve them when he left. Just then, his eyes lit up and he saw the young lawyer, Jürgen Cooper, with his hair neatly combed back. He was dressed like he was attending a banquet. Just as Cooper came over, he was accompanied by a police constable. "You can leave after signing your name," Jürgen said with his usual serious expression. "Is that all?" Klein asked in surprise. Jürgen nodded slightly. "Yes, they know you're a well-known detective." "What kind of reason is this?" Klein didn't dare to ask further. He immediately got up and followed after Jürgen, who was wearing a long black tweed coat. He signed his name at a leisurely pace before leaving. The weather was different from the last time he was led out from the police station by Jürgen. There was no rain and only thick clouds obscuring the crimson moon and stars. The streets were illuminated by gas lamps that lined both sides of the streets. "Thank you so much. I've troubled you once again." Klein briskly walked forward and came to Jürgen's side. Jürgen turned his head to look at him and said to him without a smile, "There's no need to thank me. This is my job. £2. Klein sized him up seriously and revealed a smile. "Okay." His wallet was bulging recently, and he produced 2 £1 notes at once. Without a trace of politeness, Jürgen received the payment and said, "If you're willing to enter into a formal partnership, then every time you come to the police station, I'll only charge you £1. Of course, not for the cases that are serious. You have to understand that a large portion of the fees I charge will go to the office. It's as if I would frequently be invited to the police station for some coffee in the future." "Pooey, they don't even give coffee. Theirs isn't even a cup of water." Before Klein could answer, he heard Jürgen add, "For a private detective, getting in and out of the police station is something that happens every once in a while. It's an occupational hazard." "Well, I know very well that every private detective has a problem with the illegal bearing of arms and the illegal trespassing in other people's homes. Your response this time was very good. The police couldn't find enough evidence to prove that you were bearing a gun illegally, and the explanation for the gunpowder reaction on your body was quite sufficient. The name Quelag Club was enough to convince them, otherwise, you most likely would have had to go to the magistrate's court. So, you're not a suspect, but a good citizen. A good citizen who picked up a gun and handed it in, so there was no need for a body search."